You may not believe that, but we actually began preparing this program without knowing what was going to happen. So you cannot accuse us of being or trying to serve any wave of current situation, but I think that on the other hand we cannot overestimate the importance of today's meeting in the light of the current situation. There is a whole group of speakers, and we all wish to hear from the guests, the participants of Vaclav Havel Journalism Fellowship. So at this moment I just wish to again welcome to the podium the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Petr Drulák, and also I do not want to go without recognizing Kevin Close, the former director of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, and governor of BBG, Matt Armstrong. Mr. Petr Drulák.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank to Ambassador Gandalovič and his staff for organizing this event. What is the topic of this event? For me, it's a substantive discussion, but it's also a celebration. It's a celebration of the freedom of information. And I would like to start by thanking Prague Freedom Foundation, Radio Free Europe, for actually helping to shape the project of Václav Havel Journalism Fellowship. Because this is an important project which somehow links us with the tradition of the Czech dissidents, and which also actually shows how this tradition is very much alive. When we talk about democracy, democracy cannot be without free information. I would go even further. I would say that any functioning society, any effective society, depends on the freedom of information. That's an important insight which has been used by Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev didn't want to create liberal democracy in the Soviet Union. He wanted to improve the system. And he understood that if you wanted to improve the system, you needed to make information free. And that's why he started with Glasnost, which was the campaign which preceded Perestroika. That was important. That was an important insight, and I would say that it's an insight which has been lost by current Russian leaders, who actually returned to the times before Mikhail Gorbachev. Not only that they returned to the times before Yeltsin, but even to the times before Gorbachev. And when they believe that, if they believe that they will make Russia stronger by this, I think they are wrong, because if you suppress information, you will make your own country only weaker. Having said that, any government which supports free information embraces a thankless task. Why is it thankless? Because informations tend to be subversive. Freedom of information means that you expose yourself to investigative journalists, bloggers, who actually will tell to the public something which you wanted to keep hidden. But mature democracies can cope with that. And that's why in the United States, people like Carl Bernstein or Bob Woodward are rightly celebrated, because they made the information free which was supposed to be hidden. Speaking about my own country, I think I can proudly say that despite all the imperfections from which our democracy has been suffering so far, we were doing quite well on the freedom of information. We are actually in the global top. According to the recent recent ranking by the Reporters Without Borders, we are 13. I think that's actually, if we ranked in all other international rankings like that, we would be very happy. So it's when we talk about the freedom of information, we also often talk about responsibility. Obviously. People who exercise this freedom should be responsible, because freedom of information can be abused. On the other hand, we have to say that even responsibility can be abused, especially if this responsibility is defined by those in power. And the talk or insistence on responsibility can finish or can lead to the muzzlement of the freedom of information. Now, let me make there is actually, when we talk about the freedom of information and responsibility, we should always weigh the benefits and the costs. Because freedom of information brings obvious benefits, it may bring the costs, but usually it is the case that the benefits outweigh the costs. And now, on a more personal note, let me share with you my private opinion, not the opinion of the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic, but of someone who was professor and one-time social activist. I believe that this freedom of information means a respect to subversiveness. And in this respect, I would like to mention the case of Edward Snowden. And I believe that despite the damage which he has undoubtedly done to intelligence activities, the benefits outgrow the costs. And that he provided an important public service to the United States and to the world. And it's rather odd that he found a refuge in a country which does not respect freedom of information and whose motives range from geopolitical competition to Schadenfreude. So, freedom of information is subversive, and we should actually praise the subversion. And when I praise the subversion, I also praise the Radio Free Europe, because Radio Free Europe was very subversive. I remember my father listening to Radio Free Europe in the 1980s, and it was a very important source of information for him. And today we meet here actually to welcome among us people who continue with this kind of subversive activities. Vaclav Havel Journalism Fellows. I wish them a lot of courage and a lot of responsibility in their future careers. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the program which we are going to discuss soon is called Václav Havel Journalism Fellowship, and it began as a joint venture or a cooperation between the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Radio Free Europe in 2011, 3 years ago. And since then it has brought to Prague and to the United States a number of journalists of those countries where journalism isn't free and where freedom of speech is suppressed. In this moment, I'm happy to welcome Giambalvo, the acting director and vice president of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty.
Czechs are a little bit taller. Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming this evening, where we honor the legacy of Vaclav Havel and welcome this year's Havel Journalism Fellows to Washington, D.C. Welcome. These fellows in their work offer a living testimony to Havel's belief in the transformational power of free speech. Free speech is more needed than ever before in the regions that we're all talking about this evening. You all come from countries where things have changed dramatically over the past few months. I'd like to express thanks to our partners in the Havel Fellowship. The Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, thank you. The Czech government has long understood the importance of a free media in building free societies, as we just discussed. RFVRL is proud to call Prague its home, its headquarters, and gratified that the Czech government has been so willing to host us. In ways big and small, your government has been key to RFE's continued success, and thank you for that. It was also a key reason we proposed the Havel Fellowship, working with the ministry and with PFF, started 3 years ago. I'd like to also thank the Prague Freedom Foundation for its financial support for this program. The support helps make this program possible, and we appreciate its commitment to supporting free speech and independent journalism throughout the world. And as a side note, I'd like to add that when I was a much younger man, I was also a fellow at a similar opportunity here in Washington, D.C. The fellowship opened doors to me, gave me incredible experiences. I am gratified to get to know you all a little bit, to see that you're having a similar opportunity and similar experiences. Congratulations, good luck, and thank you.
Well, over the time, as John has already mentioned, the Vaclav Havel Journalism Fellowship has created partnerships and has found new supporters. And one of the supporters, as a matter of fact, the major supporter is the newly created Prague Freedom Foundation. And I wish to recognize the founder of the Prague Freedom Foundation, John Todoroki, over there, and the director of Prague Freedom Foundation, my good friend Pavel Fischer. Another new connection of Václav Havel Journalism Fellowship is the John McCain Institute, that is represented here by its executive director, called ambassador, called Volker.
Even smaller checks. I want to thank the ambassador at Prague Freedom Foundation, Radio Free Europe, all of you for coming. I think this is a very timely subject that has been teed up for discussion tonight, and I'll say a few words about that. Before I do, however, I want to go straight to some videos, because the Havel Fellows that we have here with us this evening have prepared their own reports on the situation in Russia, in Ukraine, and I think they speak for themselves, and we should start with that. Thank you.
Between objective media outlets and the Russian propaganda that we are suffering from and all Ukrainians suffer from. So this is the video about the role of such media as RFVRL now in this tough situation in Ukraine. City center, a million demonstrators. These video images have been shown all around the world. In order to get a complete picture, Radio Liberty's correspondent Andriy Dubchak climbed on the top of a metal structure, the famous revolutionary Christmas tree.
To be honest, I'm a bit afraid of heights, but at that moment I quickly overcame despair. There was an impressively large amount of people at Maidan. I really wanted to show how big the scale was. To my surprise, the shots taken from the top of the Christmas tree were quite successful.
At the time, the TV stations under government control as Russian media significantly understated the scale of the anti-government uprising. They reported on hundreds of people present, not hundreds of thousands. This was the beginning of the revolution. Andriy says that he couldn't have imagined that they as journalists would have to take far greater risks than this one to show the truth.
I was shooting a video when riot police started running for us. They told us to get on the ground, which I did. Then they started beating me.
This is Havel and Volker, journalists for Radio Liberty. While reporting on the protest, they were brutally beaten by law enforcement officers and taken into custody. Radio Liberty journalists were the first to provide a live 24-hour broadcast of the events on the streets of Ukraine. They covered the very first Maidan night until dawn and did not stop even when petrol bombs and sniper bullets started flying above their heads. We are on the street where consequently 100 Ukrainians were martyred in a clash with the law enforcers. Now everything is covered with flowers in the memory of the fallen.
On that day, I provided a live stream demonstrating that protesters, as well as Berkut, were killed. Let's say that Russian programs lied even in harsh times like these. If you could only imagine, we were at the Hotel Ukraine, where 12 bodies were lying in the main lobby. Meanwhile, a Russian journalist comes on air and claims that only one person has been shot.
Russian TV networks have been systematically portraying distorted information on the events in the Ukraine for a long period of time. According to their reports, thousands of neo-Nazis have come out on the streets of Kiev, started attacking the police. Moreover, the revolutionary fighters are undergoing training right on the territory of the United States Embassy in Kiev. During the protest, it was difficult for Ukrainians to analyze the events in the rapid information flow. People started making lists of the few media that can be trusted. Radio Liberty was among them. The demand for truth grew at geometric progression. So did the audience of Radio Liberty.
More than 1.5 visitors in one day are seen to it as an achievement that is significant. A year ago, this was the demand for months.
Irena is the head of the Ukrainian Bureau of Radio Liberty. This is the year that the Ukrainian Bureau marks its 60-year anniversary. She says that Radio Liberty has long ago become more than a radio.
It sounds a bit odd, but on Radio Liberty you can watch reports that you won't be able to see on the big TV networks.
The information war is continuing and some of the important battles have already been lost. Andriy has just returned from Crimea, where after the victorious revolution, Russian troops entered to allegedly protect the local Russian-speaking population from Ukrainian fascists.
Let's be frank, Ukraine has lost the information war to Russia. I have just returned from Crimea. For many years, people have been watching Russian channels that were showing false and distorted information on Ukraine. In addition, the residents of Crimea really do believe that Putin brought in tanks to rescue them from Ukrainian fascists, and they are very grateful for it.
During his stay in Crimea, Andriy asked around to see which media sources are trusted by the people.
Russian TV stations, solely Russian, ORT, NTV, the Ukrainian ones, live.
And if it's all right, I think we'll just go on to the second and third videos, and then we'll begin our discussion.
Good evening. My name is Beliaev. It's as for Natalia, it's also a great honor for me to be here today, and I have to apologize because I maybe have a most humble piece for you, because I'm not working with video. I'm a radio journalist at all. And I made a small promo of my weekly broadcast, and the problem is that the core part of its promo was not translated to English, and small part of this audience which understands Russian will enjoy it, I hope, and and others will just hear. But I think. The people who are participating in this promo are so interesting that maybe just hear their voices is also is already a big deal. Thank you for your attention.
Russia in Motion is a weekly broadcast dedicated to regional civil and political movements in Russia. Here I try to pay attention to grassroots movements in small towns across the country.
My name is Ildar Gabidullin. I'm from Republic of Tatarstan. It's one of the ethnic republics of Russia. And during the fellowship, I'm with the RFERL's Tatar Bashkir service. I'm very grateful for RFERL and the Czech Republic's Foreign Ministry and the Prague Freedom Foundation for this opportunity, for this fellowship. And as a Tatar service, Crimean crisis and especially issues relating to the Crimean Tatar minority in Peninsula was a top story for the RFERL's Tatar Bashkir service. So here's a short video about the coverage of this issue. I would like to just add to that audio is a little bit fast, so listen carefully. Thank you.
Top story for RFERL's Tatar Bashkir service, otherwise known as Azovlet. Although they are geographically distinct, the Crimean and Volga Tatars of the Republic of Tatarstan are related and have similar languages. In recent weeks, Tatarstan's leadership has been playing a significant role in attempts to improve relations between the Kremlin and the Crimean Tatar community. The situation started in late February when the first signs of Russian military presence were seen in Crimea. At the same time, army movements of around 300 tanks were observed around Kazan, the capital of Tatarstan. Here's one of my reports on the subject. Despite official explanations given that these movements were merely military exercises, independent observer and editor-in-chief of Kazan's Zvezda Povolzhia, Rashid Akhmetov, told me that these were signs of Moscow testing the loyalty of the Tatarstan government, as well as warning to them. Both Azovlik and its reporters, myself included, actively followed and covered all visits by Tatarstan government officials to Crimea. Our correspondent's belief was that Russia was using Volga Tatar public figures to smooth over relations with the Crimean Tatar minority. In Kazan itself, local authorities organized a rally in solidarity with Crimea on the 5th of March in support of Moscow's official line on the crisis in Peninsula. We asked those at the rally to what extent they were aware of the actual political situation there. We then revealed that state employers had been instructed to ensure the presence of at least 10 of their workers. Some teachers and university students were also encouraged, and in some cases even forced to attend. I believe that the Tatarstan factor in the developing situation in Crimea has not been adequately explored by mainstream media outlets, so I thought that the topic should be reported in international English language media. Here's an op-ed piece for Al Jazeera, which I co-authored with my friend, the English journalist Maxim Havel. The piece explains the reasons of Tatarstan officials' visits to Crimea and their implicants. I also live blogged the Crimean crisis on Azovlik's website by posting the latest updates from our streamers on the ground, embedding independent bloggers and internet activists reports, live streams, tweets, and so forth. Tatarstan's presence in relations between Crimea and the Russian government still remains significant, even after the official annexation of the peninsula. Accordingly, coverage of the topic by RFERL's Tatar Bashkir service remains equally intensive.
Okay, thank you very much. And you have now met our three RFE journalists here. I'd like to ask them to come to the table here for our panel discussion. It is risky, it is interesting, it is significant, because without that, there wouldn't be anything like it. And so it is tremendously important that they do this kind of work. And I want to introduce our two other panelists who are joining them at the table. First, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Petr Mareš, who is Special Envoy for the Eastern Partnership in the Foreign Ministry of the Czech Republic. He's formerly a Deputy Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, who was in charge of research, development, human rights, and human resources, responsible for national minority policies, disability rights, and other issues. And he later served as an advisor on Russia and Ukraine to the Czech Defense Minister and the Czech Ambassador in The Hague. Irena Chalupa, I wish I could pronounce this correctly.
Chalupa's good.
Chalupa. She's a former senior correspondent at Radio Free Europe. She's a former senior correspondent at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. She's worked with RFERL in Washington, D.C., Prague, Kiev, Munich, and served as the director of the Ukrainian service. And she now works on Eastern Europe in the Atlantic Council of the United States. And that affiliation brings up something that I wanted to repeat. You've heard it already tonight, but you're seeing a growing collaboration in the Czech Republic, but also here in Washington among organizations that are committed to advancing the access to information and competing in the information space in what we believe is a increasingly top-down, authoritarian-style information space coming out of Russia in the East. And so you see the Atlantic Council, you see the McCain Institute, you see the Prague Freedom Foundation, you see the Czech Embassy, you see the Czech Foreign Ministry. I can speak also, I have friends at Voice of America concerned very much about the same thing. This is an important topic, a growing topic of discussion in Washington, and one that I hope all of you pay close attention to as well in all of your contacts around town. I'd like to initiate a discussion. We're very pressed for time. It's already into the evening, and I don't want this to go on at great length, but there are a number of important issues to take up here. And I thought we would just walk through sequentially, if I may. So, abandoning protocol, I would normally turn to our ambassador first. I'll bring him in last to do some of the wrap-up and some of the consequences of what we hear. I'd like to turn first to our journalists, our Havel fellows. From Ukraine and from Russia. And tell us a little bit in your own words, what is the environment like? If you are a citizen, where you're reporting from, whether it's Tatarstan or Ukraine or Northwest Russia, what is the environment that people are living in? What information do they regularly see and receive? And how does that affect what the popular attitudes and popular mindset would be? And why don't I turn to ladies first, Natalia, if you would do that, but I'd like to hear from each of the three of you briefly on this point.
Thank you. Recently, last year ago, I made a research, and it was about the ownership of biggest 50 media outlets in Ukraine. And I was looking who is the owner of it and who owns the information in Ukraine. And the result was that it's mainly oligarchs and politicians. So even after the Yanukovych regime have fallen, probably the situation in the country with the freedom of speech became better than it was under the regime, but still we very depend on the positions of oligarchs and their interest, those oligarchs who owns the biggest media channels. Also, I would like to shortly speak about the initiative that I was part of. It's called Yanukovych Leaks, and we are looking for documents that have been found in the abandoned residence of a president who ran out of the country. And this is what I just thought is that it's a great example to show what's the picture of the media market now in Ukraine. So the journalists who are working on this initiative, looking for the stories about corruption cases, they represent different media outlets. And what are those media outlets? Online, some small newspaper, I'm from Radio Liberty, Radio Svoboda, and none of TV channels. They are not interested in stories like this about corruption, about the problems in the government, about the critics that has to be put on government. So that is the state of market and the state of the media outlets that we have now in Ukraine.
And Ivan, what about in Russia?
Well, okay. When we're talking about federal level, national level, that TV channels, TV broadcasting in Russia is under control since the very beginning of Putin regime, and I think last 13 years TV content is filtered and controlled very tough. For example, Natalia said that Ukrainian television doesn't pay attention to anti-corruption investigation or other serious questions, but I think that on Ukrainian TV there is still some place for political discussion, but in Russia it's not so. And there is a set of independent media, online media, maybe radio broadcasting media, but all of them are now or on direct pressure, or they feel threat of such pressure, and if somebody pays attention to what's going on in Russia, you know examples. What media outlets are under pressure, what media are under threat of shutdown. And when we go down to the regional level, things are even better, uglier, because if you visit average-sized provincial town, you can hardly find two independent media, because if you find just one, it's okay. You can find it, and each of these media is trying to maneuver just to survive. Just like in my hometown, where my home newspaper is now under threat of shutdown. Thank you.
And you mentioned regional, and Ildar, what's the situation in Tatarstan?
I'd like to speak about Tatar language media, and it's alike with the situation with media in another Russian local languages besides Russian. There is, of course, the freedom of media. Problem of free media is close to the problem overall Russia, but there is also one sad situation about the media in local languages, is that the usage of the languages is in decline. So the role of the media is not only to support the audience with the information, but also to keep their language alive. So I would like to underline the RFRL's Tatar service. It's not only maintaining the Tatar community in Russia with the independent information, but also with the content to keep their languages alive.
That's very interesting. I want to ask, you mentioned, Natalia, ownership as an issue. That then controls content, which then controls the freedom of that actual media. Ivan, you didn't mention that as much. You talked more about government pressure. Are you seeing a difference in this between Ukraine and Russia? Or is it just a matter of time?
Oh, for Ukraine, the pressure from the government was very big under Yanukovych regime, and now that's the place where we have hope that it will not be as much as it was under Yanukovych, and that in this way we will have more freedom. So now we have another problem with the ownership and with oligarchs and politicians who dictate their views. And another problem is about language, that we don't have the independent media outlet that is speaking Russian on the eastern Ukraine. So we are missing audience there, and they have to watch Russian channels.
One should understand that you can hardly distinguish the governmental pressure and economical pressure in modern Russia, because some media are owned by oligarchs who are pillars of Putin regimes. You know in one Latin American novels, one local oligarch said, I'm not supporting regime, I am regime. And these and these oligarchs are regime itself. And when Alisher Usmanov, richest man in Russia, slightly changes editorial policy of Kommersant, one of the most prominent media in Russia, and when Mahmoud replaced maybe most successful editor-in-chief to Kremlin propagandist who has never achieved something in journalism, it looks like, well, owners makes his decision about his media. He has such right. Well, but it's not about economical reasons, it's just about political reasons, and they do so because they are oligarchs from Green Circle.
Last question for the three of you. As you can understand that in that environment, working as a journalist can actually be a very risky proposition. And I wanted to ask you, give us an example from your own experience. What kind of threats or pressure or attacks have you been subject to or have you witnessed against journalists just trying to do their job in the environment you're working in?
Yeah, I have this example, unfortunately. Before the becoming a Vaclav Havel fellow within RFERL, I was a host of a TV show on the channel TVI, and the show was about the corruption in the public procurement sphere in contracting. And I even might say that it was successful because it was quotated. And we also had this channel. It was independent channel and the only one on that period. And what happened is that the government didn't go for each journalist who did their job, but they firstly took our licenses, so we became only cable TV channel, and then they took control over the whole channel, and so we couldn't stay more on it and work and continue criticizing the government and saying the truth. So we all quit and left without any job. That's my example from my experience.
Thank you. Ildar, do you have a story?
Well, I would like to also speak about well, of course, the safety of the journalists in Russia is very crucial, but there is also one problem, very big problem that journalists face because of the situation. It is that independent media managers are not interested in running their outlets in their own line, so they have to follow the official line of Moscow. So independent journalists are forced or to leave their work, or they are just shorten their resources, which is also crucial. So the resources problem is, I think, essential now.
Mm-hmm. Resources, economic pressure. Ivan?
Well, when we talk about Russia, we must remember that level of violence against journalists is so high that you can face it just in countries that on edge of civil war, in a condition of civil war, maybe failed states like Afghanistan or Somalia. But on the other hand, in my hometown, I have never faced some direct threats. For example, last fall, few weeks before I started my fellowship, our newspaper published papers from regional administration which were dedicated to local elections, and these papers showed how these elections were organized and how local authorities used their administrative resources to put these elections into a direction they want to. And despite the fact that administration staffer who gave me these papers was fired from administration, newspaper itself didn't suffer from that. But right now, editor-in-chief of my home newspaper is in direct conflict with governor. And this conflict wasn't provoked some brave article or some serious investigation. It was just about half-joking post on Facebook. But this half-joking post on Facebook now may bring to shut down our whole media group.
Interesting. I want to bring in Irena at this point, because you've been around this field a long time now. And you've seen, that gives you an advantage of perspective over time. How is what we are seeing today, whether it's in Ukraine or Russia or this whole RFE, Radio Liberty space, changing? What do we see today that's different from where we were before? Trend lines, better, worse? What are you concerned about?
You mean what's different in terms of media development?
In terms of the media environment, access to information, journalist safety.
Having worked for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty for more than 2 decades, and having seen how Ukrainian media has grown and evolved over the years, I'll just limit my remarks perhaps to that, and then maybe say a few things about Ukraine's eastern neighbor. When Ivan was saying how Ukrainian media is so much freer and so much more open than Russian media, it reminded me of this Ukrainian saying, "Na bezrybyi rak ryba," where there are no fish, even a crab is a fish. So while Ukrainian media is relatively free compared to Russian media, it still has a considerable way to go. What I would like to focus on is the quality of journalism. People like Natalia and an awful lot of other people really are marvelous journalists. The capital is there. It just needs room to grow. We have a cadre of journalists in Ukraine who know how to do their job. They understand journalism and they understand the appetite for real journalism. What they need is freedom to grow and freedom to develop. Just in the midst of the revolution that Ukraine has seen, we've seen several things just appear. 2 independent television stations. One of them is currently being broadcast on the first state channel. This is something called Hromadske Telebaczenie, public radio, so to speak. This is made up of journalists who are, many of them are veterans. They've worked in various other startups that have tried to be independent media, that have been closed for one reason or another. They're currently funded by grants and donations. And if Ukraine goes in the proper direction and they do make some sort of a deal with this group and they are broadcast on Channel 1, I think that that will be a real harbinger of serious change. Another quite an interesting outfit is called Espresso TV. Why Espresso? I don't know. Maybe because Espresso is a short cup of coffee, gives you a jolt, and the same thing with them and some of their programs and news bites. They're very short and very effective. They do an amazing, truly an amazing job. They are on top of very many things. They have a lot of balls in the air, but they do quite a good job. So in terms of that, the difference is, I think that we have now, particularly in Ukraine, a whole cadre of journalists who are not happy to serve the masters, which is something that journalists did in the Soviet era. We also see that in Russia, we have a lot of good-looking people who are willing to serve the masters. We see Russia Today, which is clearly a propaganda channel that's slick, well-produced, has articulate, smart people presenting what to our Western eyes and ears is clear propaganda. So I think that the ground is very fecund for real journalism to take root in post-communist societies, particularly in Ukraine. I believe it's possible also in Russia. We've seen good journalism coming out of Russia. But at the same time, the enemy, if I can use that term, is working with all the tools of the digital 21st age. But, as American statesmen have said, Russia is being driven by 19th century values. So if we see those values continued in that media and journalist presentations, so they're telling an old stale imperial chauvinistic totalitarian story, but with all the bells and whistles of the digital age.
So let me try to summarize a little bit of what I thought I heard you say. Tell me if this is right or wrong. That you had a contracting media environment in Ukraine, which is now more open as a result of the recent revolution, departure of Viktor Yanukovych. So there is hope there. And there's also human capital and potential.
Absolutely.
In the case of Russia, what I thought I heard you say is a contracting media environment, where instead of the human capital being used to create a free media environment, they're actually becoming complicit with the system.
Yes, absolutely.
Natalia.
May I just have one short remark to what you, Irena, said about espresso television. Just an example. Yes, it did a very good job, a big job during the protests. But look,
I know there are issues with espresso as well.
But who is it owned
Yeah.
by? It's owned by the member of the parliament who was from the opposition, and now he is in the government. He's in a coalition now. So we have to see now how this editorial policy of this channel, whether it will change or not. So we again rely on the owner in this media outlet.
I didn't say it was a finished story.
Now I want to ask one more question to this side of the table, and I'm going to ask our ambassador here to give us some political context to this. But the final question I have for you all, given what you've described, a media environment under pressure, some release of that pressure in Ukraine because of this revolution, the active use of propaganda by Russian authorities touching a wide area, how do you see the flip side of that? Where do you see Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Voice of America, BBC, commercial outlets? How are we doing as a Western community competing in that information space, given what is coming out of the East? Yeah, start with Irena, and I'd like to hear from our journalists.
Well, you may all remember when Secretary of State Clinton some years ago said that we are losing the information war. And I think to a very large extent we continue to be losing that war. I think combating Russian propaganda is a bigger task than simply getting extra funding for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Voice of America. I think we need a concerted effort on many, many fronts to open people's eyes to what essentially is Russian propaganda. Sometimes even our free Western media are somewhat complicit in giving the bad guys and the lies equal time or equal consideration, as if this is a legitimate argument. It's sort of like, you know, if you invite a cannibal to dinner, don't be surprised if your child is missing. I'm sorry to be so brutal, but sometimes I find Western media too timid to call Russian lies exactly what they are. And sometimes our willingness and open-mindedness to be objective, to be balanced, to show both sides of the story can work against us in our sort of just elasticity in terms of the storytelling. I think that outfits like Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Voice of America, they need to exist, but they also need to be much more creatively aggressive and be more of a kind of a rapid reaction force, if I can use that term, a military term. things need to happen much, much faster, and they need to be proactive. At the same time, we need to really foster those promising elements on the ground. And I think that efforts like this fellowship is one fine example of that kind of work. I think if every Western media opened up its doors to interns from the former Soviet Union, to young people who are willing to come in and work for a few months, to learn the craft of the trade, the tricks of the trade, and also to learn to think differently. Let's face it, anybody who has a chance to live somewhere for a considerable period of time and look at how things function also is affected by that and learns to think creatively, democratically, openly, and hopefully will learn to question authority, learn to question politicians, and learn to question the status quo, which ultimately is one of the key jobs of journalism.
Okay, and I want to ask Ivan maybe first. How do you see this competition in the information space now? How is it affecting public knowledge and opinions?
Well, I would rather avoid such words like information war, because I will never consider me as a soldier for information war, because, you know, the professor of economy doesn't compete with big pocket, for example. And scientists, Nobel awarded scientists doesn't compete with people who make astrology predictions. It's absolutely different areas of activity. And information war, when we use this word, I think it means that mutual propaganda takes place. Information war can be just propaganda against propaganda. And while state-run propaganda can be aggressive, very primitive, can lie, can provide false news, and we cannot do that. And I think we just have to do what we already do. And there is no direct competition, and it will never be. I think so.
If I could just put in 2 cents worth on the tail end of Ivan. Yeah, these are phrases that we use.
I think that independent media organizations of Russia and news outlets, Western news outlets that cover the area, they should. It will not be a mistake for them to widen their activity and their broadcasting, and such. In this way, I think truth will prevail.
Okay, thank you. Natalia, did you want to say something?
Sure. I would like to talk shortly about the field that I know about. It's the field of the investigative journalism and the role of it in all that happened for the last few months in Ukraine. So journalists were reporting on corruption in their investigative journalism, and people came to the streets, in my strongly believing, because they were tired of corruption in their government. So, and the investigative reporting, it's something that always been supported only by donors and by people, just Ukrainians. They were sending money for that, and never by the owners of big TV channels or big media outlets. So that's the role of the West and of the U.S. Supporting this real storytelling about corruption and cases like this, and it's very precious for the journalists who already tried to do things like this. It's very precious to have a place to continue, and Radio Liberty, one of them. It doesn't matter is it Yanukovych government or somebody else. It's always the place to continue objective journalism.
Thank you. All right, Ambassador, I'm going to turn to you. Put this in context for us. Why does this matter? how is it affecting the geopolitical events that we see today? With Crimea, with Eastern Ukraine, with Transnistria, with Russian minorities in the Baltic states, and what should we, as transatlantic allies, be doing?
Well, I'm a historical optimist too, and I do share the opinion of Ildar that the truth will prevail, but we should help it. And well, I understand completely even the reluctance to speak about information war. But this is information war. Maybe only one side is waging the war, but it is a war, and it's not anything which would appear today or yesterday or last week. It's going on for more than 10 years. And we were ridiculizing it, we were laughing at it. But it's it's been a systematic building of a new picture of the world. Picture of the world which is similar to the picture of the Cold War era. And we didn't do much about it. We were believing, as you do, that the truth will prevail, and that there is no need for the professor to dispute the meaning of pickpocketer. But we were wrong. Today's people in Russia and people in greater part of the world do believe that, at least in the western part of Ukraine, there are fascists. People do believe in Russia that current Ukrainian government is run by fascists. And if possible, only thanks to this year-long systematic propaganda war. So we can, you know, this beautiful credo about prevailing truth, we Czechs, we have it on our coat of arms. And well, it is a presidential flag, so we should be supporters of it. But as I said, we should help it as much as we can. I believe that there is many reasons for being optimistic. First of all, because of what Irena said. As for the human resources, Ukraine is perfectly equipped to have a free journalism, to have a free media. And I believe it applies not only for Ukraine, it applies for other Eastern Partnership countries too. I don't know much about Azerbaijan, but even in Belarus there's a lot of young generation educated who would be able, if they had an opportunity, to provide their population with reliable and free information. What can we do for it? I remember I participated in a discussion immediately after the Orange Revolution in Ukraine about the future of Ukrainian media. It was a discussion about public media. It started then, and then it somehow disappeared. There are no public media at the moment in Ukraine, with the exception of Hromadskoe Telebachenje, which is something which will go down to the textbook of history of journalism, because it's a real independent, real public medium, founded through people's money. It's an incredible story, and the role it played during Maidan, well, as I said, it deserves books and serious research. But so far as Ukraine will depend on the goodwill of Petr Poroshenko and others, there will be no free space of information. Well, Channel 5 for a long period was one of the best channels. I know it. They made a long interview with me, so it must have been.
And it belongs to Mr. Poroshenko.
Yeah, it's so. But at the moment, when Petr Poroshenko decides it's enough,
yeah,
it's over. So, if I may, I would strongly advise Ukrainians to use the opportunity of current revolutionary situation and to create an institutional framework for independent public media, first of all for the TV, because the TV in all the Eastern Partnership countries, including Ukraine, is the key to the public opinion. There is a wide access to internet in all these countries, but well, those who do use internet, they actually do not need public TV. So what we can do is to consider our three brave Vaclav Havel scholars to be the first job. We should offer much more scholarships of this kind. Actually, what Irena was saying, it was to the point. Not only scholarships on journalism, but generalist scholarships. We need thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people, young people from Eastern Partnership countries coming to Europe, to America, and returning back home. It will change the situation. And by the way, speaking here in America, our European Union is not doing enough. We are just now opening a new Erasmus Plus program, investing much more money than before to international exchange of students. But Ukrainians will, even according to Erasmus Plus, will still be in the same category as the rest of the world. So if we want to help them, we have to change it. We have to open the doors for a younger generation. And I, in such a situation, I would join you, and I will be optimistic about the prevalence of the tools in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I think there's a reception to follow here.